UFC 317 this weekend is one of the best events of the year for betting. So if you're planning on betting this fight this weekend, you need to watch the video all the way through, because I'm going to be dropping major knowledge that I hope you're going to be able to use to maybe earn some extra cash this weekend, or at the very least, perhaps avoid some losses and save yourself some money on some losing bets. Everything that I'm going to be talking about in this video is going to be backed up by many hours of research and over 15 years of experience making money betting on this sport. We make a profit almost every week. We cook big time in the live betting group, and we made a profit last week like we do most weeks. I'm going to drop a clip now where you can see us hit a very nice winner on Mohammed Usman in the opening fight of last week's card. Apologies, I forgot to hit record and capture my analysis and commentary while the fight was taking place, but you can see the aftermath of my community winning a bet. So if you watch every UFC event live, why aren't you in my live betting group? It's an absolute no-brainer. It'll pay for itself. You'll absolutely love it, and you'll make a profit most weeks. Look at this profit chart. It is one of the most beautiful things, one of the most incredible profit charts you will ever see. And here's the clip of us hitting that winner. Shout out to Mohammed Usman. He came through for us big time. So we will await the decision on the Abdel Wahab versus Mohammed Usman fight. So let me know how you scored this, guys. But this should be 29-28. Mohammed Usman clear as day. And if the judges score this fight correctly, we will kick the night off with another very nice, juicy underdog winner. Let's see what the judges are saying. Come on, judges. Do the right thing. Do your job. I'm not exaggerating, guys. This would be one of the worst decisions of the year if they score this for Hamdi. This would be absolutely shocking. Hopefully we can kick the night off with a win and set us up for a very big profitable night. Obviously, hometown judging, bad decisions are characteristic of this part of the world. We knew the risk when we placed the bet on Usman. However, if the judges do their job here, we are kicking the night off with a very big win. So here we go. Come on, judges, do your job. It's unanimous for someone. Come on, boys. Kicking the night off with a winner. 29-28. Unanimous decision. The judges do their job. The judges come through for us big time. And guys, I will say the same thing. Guys, that I've been saying for months. I say this to you guys every single week, and most of you guys have been with me for years. You know I always give it to you 100% straight. 100% straight. Always give it to you guys 100% straight. I'm not exaggerating. We are currently in a golden age for UFC live betting. I understand that we may have choppy periods of break even, some ups, some downs. We won some money kicking off last week's event and gave it all back. I understand it's hard and it's frustrating, but you have to hang in there. You've got to hang in there, because right now, this is an absolute golden age. I've been doing this for 15 years. Sorry, my dog is chasing a balloon out in the garden. I don't even know where she got the balloon from, so that's a little bit concerning. But anyway, I was putting me off. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I can't remember any other time when the odds were this generous in live betting. So you know, over the next few years, we're going to make a lot of money. Just got to hang in there, and it feels great to kick the night off with a win. That was a very nice big underdog winner that we hit last week on Mohammed Usman. And we're hitting a lot of big underdog winners at the moment. We are in a golden age for live betting on the UFC. At the moment, the algorithm seems to have changed a little bit, where the odds are super generous in live betting. So we're making a profit most weeks, and we're absolutely cooking. If you watch every UFC event live, do your homework on me, do your homework on my live betting group, look at this profitability chart and consider coming and joining the team, because you'll absolutely love it. We make a profit most weeks. Been doing this for over 10 years, and our edge bet in this sport is absolutely massive. So if you do watch every UFC event live, come join the team and make money whilst watching the sport you love. It's an absolute no-brainer. And now it's time for me to demonstrate to you just why I've made so much money betting on this sport over the last 10 years by sharing my analysis with you so that you can see for yourselves our edge is absolutely massive when we then apply this knowledge, this experience, and this research to live betting this sport. So obviously, I can talk you through the fights from a pre-fight betting point of view in this video, but the secret sauce, my secret weapon, my bread and butter, the thing that I do very best is turning this research, turning this knowledge, turning this experience into cold hard cash from live betting these fights. So we will start off by taking a deep dive into the main event of this weekend's card, which is going to be Charles Oliveira versus Ilia Topuria. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds, we can see that Topuria is a pretty big favourite in this fight at average odds of about 1.24, which is going to be minus 417 for an implied probability of 81%. If we take a look at the odds on Oliveira, he's around a 4.25 underdog, which is going to be plus 325 for an implied probability of 24%. So Charles Oliveira is 35 years old, 5'10", with a 74-inch reach, and Ilia Topuria is 28 years old, 5'7", with a 69-inch reach. So we can see Oliveira has a very nice 5-inch reach advantage that he does a pretty good job of using. He knows how to use his length and his reach well. He's taller than Topuria. He's also a lot older than Topuria, and we know that this fight is going to be at lightweight, and we know that Topuria has obviously previously fought at featherweight. So this will be the first time that we're going to see Ilia Topuria in the lightweight division as he fights for the vacant title to try and become the 2-division champion. And the UFC are being very kind to Topuria here because they're giving him a chance to be a 2-division champion against a 35-year-old Brazilian with 45 pro fights and a hell of a lot of miles on the clock. So, you know, in Oliveira's defense, he's not declined anywhere near as much as you would expect, you know, a Brazilian who's been in the UFC since his early 20s and now has 45 pro fights to have declined. But obviously at this stage in Oliveira's career, he's going to be declining from fight to fight and his best days are behind him. Whereas Topuria, at just 28 years old, is getting better and better and better from fight to fight. And we're seeing massive improvement in Topuria from fight to fight. Statistically, obviously the younger fighter wins around 67% of the time when there is a 7-year age gap in a fight. However, that's an average of all different ages competing against one another when there's a 7-year age gap. So when 37-year-olds fight 30-year-olds, when 33-year-olds fight 26-year-olds. And what we really know this statistic shows is that older guys don't beat younger guys in their prime very often. And so with the ages of these two, I would say that even though we know the younger fighter wins around 67% of the time when there's a 7-year age gap in a fight, that is just an average. And if we studied the percentage of times that, you know, a guy like Oliveira, who's had 45 pro fights in the UFC, were to beat a young, hungry bull with 30% of the number of fights that he's got, who's 7 years younger, I would imagine the statistic would be far higher than 67%. It's probably pushing 80% if we had the actual real data. So as a result, even though Topuria is a very big favourite, commanding an implied probability of 81%, before we consider how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, 45 pro fights is a lot of fights, is a lot of miles on the clock, it's a lot of injuries, a lot of wear and tear, it's a lot of damage. And so this is a young man's game, and we know Topuria is rightly favoured in this one. But like I say, every single week, and have done for years, we've got to let the odds do the work for us. And there will be people watching this video that don't understand that concept. They will just be, you know, looking at this sport through a very linear lens and only focused on who they think is most likely to win. And so if I come out and say, I think Ilia Topuria is most likely to win, but I also think he's a very, very bad bet, and if I were to bet this fight, I would take Oliveira, there are a lot of people watching this video that can't understand that concept. So in a big high profile fight like this, is a really good opportunity for me to explain why it is absolutely impossible to bet Ilia Topuria this weekend in any capacity, no matter how confident you are he'll win. So if you look at Topuria's odds, we can see they carry an implied probability of 81%. And what this means is that the bookies are capping his chances of winning this fight at 81%. And if you don't give him a better than 81% chance of winning this fight, you're placing a negative EV bet, and long term, you're almost certainly going to make a loss over the long term betting like that. So while everyone watching this video can accept that based how they match up stylistically and based on all the X factors, Topuria is likely to win, Topuria is a very bad bet if you place him or place a bet on him at these odds. Whereas if you look at Charles Oliveira, even though he is the least likely fighter to win, if we take a look at his average odds, which are about 4.20, which is plus 320 for an implied probability of 24%, you can see ways in which Charles Oliveira could win this, which I will get into with my analysis. And for me, it's far easier to analyze this fight in a way where I can find value in someone like Oliveira than someone like Topuria, because when you look at a sport as chaotic and unpredictable as MMA, it's very, very, very difficult to, honestly cap someone in this odds range, because when you throw into, fouls, injuries, bad weight cuts, staph infections, fighters coming in injured, for all we know, Topuria could have a broken hand or something in coming in this weekend, and he doesn't want to pull out because he doesn't want to piss Dana off in one of the biggest cards of the year. And so even before you consider how two guys match up stylistically, there's all those X factors that make it very difficult to bet a fighter in this odds range. And then you throw into the mix the fact that you have flash KOs, and Charles Oliveira is a very dangerous submission artist, and it's far easier to find reasons to bet someone in this odds range at an implied probability of just 24% as it is to bet on someone in this odds range, because in this odds range you have to maintain a very, very high win rate to even break even, right? If your win rate is like 80-85%, you're just breaking even. You really have to crush it in this odds range, which is a very difficult thing to do when you're betting on a sport as chaotic as MMA. So a lot of people will watch this video and they won't watch most of my videos every week. Most people, a lot of people turn up for these big pay-per-views. That's a really good opportunity for me to just explain why most of my analysis for this fight will be centered around Charles Oliveira, because if you understand how to make a profit betting on this sport, Topuria is not even in your thought process. It's not even a conversation, because in these circumstances he's not even a consideration. You've got to let the odds do the work for you, and Topuria is completely off the table. And that is why most of the analysis now will focus on Charles Oliveira's chances of winning, because if you want to bet this fight, this is who you should be focused on. So if we consider how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, and then we consider past the victory for Oliveira, we can start to paint a picture as to how much value there may not be on a guy like Do Bronx. So in terms of how they match up stylistically, when you watch footage of Topuria, one of the first things that stands out is that he's a phenomenal boxer. I mean, you've got to be a phenomenal boxer to knock out guys like Alexander Volkanovski, and especially Max Holloway. The Holloway knockout is absolutely shocking. And what I really like about Topuria is, even though he's very short with a short reach, he does a really good job of working his way inside without really taking too much damage. And even though he has big knockouts against some very big names and guys like Max Holloway that have granite chins, I don't actually think Topuria is that powerful, which I know will be a crazy thing for me to say, but that's actually a compliment. I think Topuria's knockout ability just comes from speed and technique. They say speed kills, and they say that the shots to knock you out are the ones you don't see coming. And you really see that with Topuria. He can get inside and cover distance and light you up with incredibly accurate combinations, and is very impressive to see. Topuria, very high level boxer, at a level that you don't really see in the UFC very often. He's a little bit special from that respect. However, he isn't bulletproof. And if you go back and watch his fight against Jay Herbert, I know it was 3 years ago now, I know that, he's improved a lot since that Jay Herbert fight. We've certainly seen that. But that fight definitely showed he's not bulletproof. And if you go back and watch that fight, he was rocked, wobbled, dropped 2 or 3 times and almost knocked out. So what that says to me is he's not invincible here, and we know Oliveira is a dangerous striker. He's got dangerous Muay Thai, nasty knees down the middle, nasty elbows. He uses his length well, and while from a technical point of view Oliveira will be outgunned because Topuria is a very good boxer, good at getting inside, Oliveira is still very capable of hurting him on the feet. So straight away, if you're considering betting on a guy like Ilia Topuria at an implied probability of 80%, you can't hand on heart stand there and feel confident that Oliveira can't knock him out, because he absolutely can. Because if Jay Herbert can do it, or come very close to doing it, Charles Oliveira is absolutely capable of doing it as well. So in terms of how these two match up when it comes to grappling, obviously both of them have a base in grappling, but over the years they very much evolved into two fighters that spend a lot of their time striking, right? So Oliveira started off with a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and Topuria started off as a wrestler, and now Oliveira has this high-level Muay Thai. Topuria is a very good boxer, and we're left in a situation wondering if this fight will even go to the ground, because both these guys do like to stand and strike. If the fight goes to the ground, I do worry for Topuria here, because we haven't seen a whole lot of his grappling. Last time we saw his grappling in any meaningful sort of way was that fight against Bryce Mitchell, and he did gas out pretty bad in that fight and look really sloppy. Now, what might save him in this one, just like what saved him against Bryce Mitchell, is that Oliveira has a tendency to slow down as fights wear on if you make him work really hard too. And before you rush to tell me I'm wrong on Discord or in the YouTube comment section, I do understand that you can pull up specific fights of Charles Oliveira's where he's gone 3 rounds, 5 rounds and hasn't slowed at all, but those tend to be fights where he's been in total control. If you make Oliveira work hard and you have some back and forth, he is very prone to slowing down, and as a result, it's not as big of a deal that Topuria also has a history of slowing down if you make him work really hard, because if you've got two guys tired, it's kind of a fair even situation then. And again, I'll say the same about Topuria as I said about Charles Oliveira. You can't look at cardio in a linear way. It quite often comes down to how much energy both guys exert, and so we can all look at 3 or 5 round fights with Topuria where he hasn't slowed. Obviously, he didn't really look too tired against Max Holloway. He went 5 rounds with Emmett, but for the most part, these are very slow-paced fights. If these two start mixing it up on the ground and getting in crazy scrambles and crazy, different grappling positions, there's quite a good chance they'll both slow. And this is the area that I am particularly worried for Topuria, because Oliveira is a very opportunistic grappler. He's very good at jumping on the neck. He's very good at locking in very deep chokes before you have time to defend them. And we saw Oliveira put Sarukian in 2 really bad positions in one of his recent fights, and we don't know enough about Topuria's grappling to know if Topuria has got the skills or the stones to fight through the kind of position that Oliveira is very, very capable of putting him in. What I do know for a fact is that Arman Sarukian is on a completely different level of MMA grappling to Ilia Topuria. Sarukian, very, very high level MMA grappler. And Oliveira had Sarukian in a lot of trouble in that fight. He would have finished most guys in the division with the positions that he put Sarukian in. Sarukian was just too damn tough, too damn persistent, managed to fight his way out of those positions. Be interesting to see what we get from Topuria. Now, Topuria is also obviously stepping up from featherweight to lightweight for this fight, so there's a bit of a size difference as well, which may hinder him not only in stand-up with a 5-inch reach, but also on the ground. Size matters, although, to be fair, Oliveira is not a particularly physically imposing fighter. So what does all this stuff kind of mean? Well, what this stuff means is, based on past performances, the most likely outcome here is Ilia Topuria establishes dominance and control on the feet, uses his wrestling in reverse to prevent Oliveira from getting him to the ground, and just basically outboxes him and most likely knocks him out at some point. That's the most likely outcome. The problem is that outcome is totally baked into the odds and there's just no value here. So then you have to assess what are the ways in which Oliveira can cause Topuria problems, and how do you put that in percentage terms to determine if there's any value in betting on Oliveira as a pretty big underdog this weekend? What I would say about that is I don't think there's much chance that Oliveira were to knock Topuria out on the feet, but you've got to give it like at least a 10 to 15% chance, in my opinion, simply because he is pretty evil, he is pretty nasty, and you've got the size difference as well. So 5'10" versus 5'7". We know one of Oliveira's biggest weapons is the knee up the middle and the head kick. That's two big weapons. So knee up the middle, head kick, and obviously 5'10" versus someone that's 5'7". It's going to be a lot easier to land knees up the middle on the chin and those, big head kick shots against a shorter opponent, right? It's just common sense, it's physics. So for me, you've got to give Oliveira like at least a 10 to 15% chance of knocking Topuria out. Just pure flash KO. Doesn't mean he can outstrike him, but pure flash KO, especially when we've seen Topuria wobbled multiple times by Jay Herbert. I know Jay Herbert does have raw power, but Oliveira can be pretty nasty on the feet. So 10 to 15% chance, perhaps maybe I'm being too generous. You let me know. Maybe I'm not being generous enough. Maybe you think Oliveira's chances stretches to 20-30% chance of causing Topuria on the feet. I think anything more than 30% is getting a little bit aggressive, but let me know what you think, because Topuria, he's a short guy and Oliveira can be pretty nasty. Now in terms of grappling, this is where it gets very dangerous for Topuria. Of course, it won't be easy for Oliveira to get the fight to the ground because he's small. He's muscular, he's compact, he can use his wrestling in reverse. But again, this is where the size and the body types of both guys do present some problems for Topuria, because where he's short and has that lower center of gravity, and Oliveira is longer and taller with those skinny arms, obviously he can reach around, sink in chokes, attack Topuria's neck from some pretty dangerous, unorthodox positions where Oliveira is going to have a lot of leverage with how much taller than Topuria he is. So there's a lot of danger in this fight in grappling positions for Topuria. And with the size difference, Oliveira doesn't even necessarily need to get to the ground in order to attack with chokes. So Topuria needs to stay away from the clinch, stay nowhere near Charles Oliveira, which is a difficult thing to do because Oliveira likes to come forward with a lot of pressure, grab a hold of you, and make you fight it out with him in the clinch, because he knows if you're close to him, you're close enough for him to grab a hold of your neck and attack with one of his legendary chokes. So for me, you've got to give Oliveira, a 15 to maybe 20% chance of submitting Topuria too. Maybe that's a little bit aggressive, but when you look at Topuria's style of fighting, how he struggled against Bryce Mitchell, again, I know he's improved a lot since then, you have to really question. I hate talking like this because people always take me out of context, but you do have to question if, or to what degree, luck has played a part in Topuria's career. He's a very good boxer, but it wasn't that long ago that he almost got knocked out 2 or 3 times against Herbert and looked like absolute shit against Bryce Mitchell. Yes, he's improved since then, but since then he's fought a 150-year-old Josh Emmett, and Alexander Volkanovski, whose chin is totally gone. The Diego Lopez fight showed us that. It's like every time the wind changes direction now, Volkanovski gets wobbled. And the Holloway knockout is legitimately impressive, but if you go back and watch that fight, it was very close, very competitive, and Holloway was winning before the knockout. So it's an interesting matchup. I'm looking forward to see how Topuria handles Oliveira, because Oliveira is no picnic and he's very dangerous in all positions. If you want to bet this fight, you have to go dog or pass. You have to take Oliveira. For those of you that want to know my pick to win, obviously it's going to be Topuria. I'm not stupid, but from a betting point of view, you would be foolish to bet on Topuria at these odds, in my opinion. and in the opinion of maths, to be fair. But anyway, in terms of the over-under on this one, I do think that Charles Oliveira has shown his hand in fights like this. I think Oliveira has realised at this point in his career what gives him the best chance of winning, and he kind of just accepts that it might not be the smartest, most tactical approach to fighting, but he's going to go out in his shield and fight like it anyway. So at this point, we've seen Oliveira in so many of these big fights where, you know, he gets the big Bruce Buffer thing before the fight and the big walkout and the crowd are going crazy. He's headlined so many big pay-per-views. He's been in so many high-profile matchups. And every time we see him in one of these fights, a big high-profile matchup, he does the same thing. He comes forward, doesn't take a backward step, and he looks to create chaos. And Oliveira, you know, kind of relies on his ability to thrive in that chaos as a mechanism to pick up wins. So he knows that he can hurt you on the feet. He knows that guys are more likely to make bad decisions under pressure, which is why he comes forward in that Muay Thai stance with relentless pressure. And he also knows if you create enough chaos in the octagon, you know, you lose concentration for a second, expose your neck, he's going to jump all over it and go for one of his many different kinds of chokes that he can use to put you in a real bad position. So I think that's what we're going to get from Oliveira. He's going to come out the gate super hard, super aggressive, walk Topuria down, try to create chaos in there, and I think we're going to see someone get finished pretty quick. I think you're either going to see Topuria, you know, make a mistake and be made to pay, or you're going to see Topuria use his wrestling in reverse to pick Oliveira off as he comes forward and probably brutally knock him out. I don't see much middle ground here, especially with how tall and stiff and rigid Oliveira stands, because even though he's a pretty nasty striker, he doesn't move his head very much, which is not good when you're facing someone with boxing as dangerous and as effective as Ilia Topuria. So when we look at the over-under, the odds kind of reflect what I've just said. You know, the main over line is going to be over 1.5 rounds either way, over under 1.5 rounds. Personally, I think it's more likely to end under 1.5 rounds, but the odds are absolutely terrible. I think if you really want to bet an over-under on this fight, try and play it a little bit safer and go under 2.5 rounds. Obviously, you have to take much worse odds, but I would be surprised if this fight went past the 12.5 minute mark, because with how dangerous and how aggressive both guys are, 12.5 minutes is an absolute eternity for them to both be in there with one another. I'd be very, very surprised if the fight lasted that long. In terms of the props, the most likely outcome for me is going to be Topuria by knockout or TKO, but again, the odds are absolutely dreadful. They're unplayable. You cannot touch that. So, with that being said, do we have any other options for the props if you wanted to sprinkle a little bit of money to make watching the fight more interesting? Because it is, you know, at the end of the day, a lot of people bet on this sport for fun, right? Entertainment. Gambling is allegedly a form of entertainment, even though I don't find it particularly entertaining. Not a whole lot jumping out at me, if I'm honest. What's Oliveira by submission? I've been building my own odds comparison tool recently, and I, you know, in the past where I'd be like, I was really disorganized, I can't find it. I have a new appreciation for how difficult it is to build a tool like this. So 7.0 plus 600. Something for you to think about, but I wouldn't touch it personally, because from my perspective, in percentage terms, the odds on Oliveira by submission aren't that much better than his money line odds, so you might want to give that a miss. Now let's take a deep dive into one of the most interesting fights on this card, which is going to be Alexandre Pantoja versus Kai Kara France. This is the kind of fight that we make a lot of money on, because this is the perfect kind of matchup where we've got so much information on both guys. If you take a look at Alexandre Pantoja's record, you can see over the last couple of years, he's been involved in some really competitive fights where he's been tested in all different areas, and the same can be said for Kai Kara-France. So coming into a matchup like this, there are no unanswered questions. We've got so much information on these two that we can use in live betting to give us a very strong read on how this fight is likely to play out. So if you want to make money betting on a fight like this, you've got two options, right? You can place a bet before the fight takes place and hope that your analysis, your interpretation of how they match up ends up playing out and you make a bit of money. Or you can do the smart thing, spend a few hours, watch the last 3 or 4 fights from both Pantoja and Kara-France, so that as the fight is taking place, you will know exactly how it's likely to go as the fight progresses based on past performances. And this is why we make a profit almost every week live betting on this sport. This is why our edge is so big, and this is why this profit chart is one of the most brilliant things you will ever see in the domain of making money. I'm the best in the world at live betting on the sport, and a large part of this profit chart is due to winning bets on matchups exactly like this, where we have very, 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 very deep levels of knowledge on both fighters that we can then weaponize and use to punish the betting sites by winning bets on matchups where we can essentially see into the future based on the hard work we put in to research this fight, based on what these guys have shown us before. So if you're betting this fight, I really hope that you're going to be able to use the information I'm going to be sharing with you now on how these two match up stylistically to make money in one way or another. And if you're in my live betting group, you already know for every single fight on every single UFC card, I'm coming in with a high level of preparation to give us the absolute best chance of making a profit on that fight. That's why we've been able to cook up this absolutely magical chart over the long term, because we put the work in. So let's get into this one now. It's a brilliant fight. And where do we even begin? So many layers to it. So let's start off with the simple things, right? The tail of the tape, the stuff that we can all see and feel and understand that is not too complicated. So Pantoja, 35 years old, 5'5" with a 68-inch reach. Kara-France, 32 years old, 5'4" with a 69-inch reach. So both guys are about the same age and about the same size. Yes, Pantoja is quite old for a flyweight, but he hasn't really shown any signs of decline, so I don't think that's too big of an issue. What I would say is, even though these two are roughly the same size, there's a huge difference in physicality, and Pantoja is much more physically imposing than Kara-France, with crushing grappling control, big power in his hands, even though there are some downsides to being very physically imposing, which we'll get into. A big part of the reason why Pantoja has held the belt for so long is down to his physicality, but I feel it's also the biggest risk to his belt as well. So in terms of X factors on this one, other than this being Kai Kara-France's first title fight, there's not really a whole lot else to talk about. So I guess we could probably talk about how Pantoja's physicality may get him into trouble here. See, there's so much to talk about on a fight as complex as this. I'm trying to think about the best way to present all the information to you and what order to go through, because I want to be showing you some footage on this one as well. Okay, so whenever we have fighters like Pantoja or Kai Kara-France, we're always analysing strengths and weaknesses. And in recent weeks, we've spoken about guys like Dariush, who have probably the best cardio in the history of the sport. But then we have to talk about the trade-offs that come with that. And we say, you know, there's very few guys like Dariush that can go extremely hard and have excellent cardio, but also have power and physicality to go with it. There's always a trade-off. It's like when you're creating a character in a brand new RPG game like Fallout or Oblivion or Skyrim. When you first create that character, you can't throw all your skills up to the max. You have a number of points to divide up amongst all the skills, and you have to decide what areas you want to be strong in, and when you dedicate your points to those strong areas, you're going to be weaker in other areas. Mixed martial arts is often very the same. Every once in a while, you'll get a unicorn come along that doesn't really have any major weaknesses, like a George St. Pierre or a John Jones or a Jose Aldo, but they are very, very, very fucking rare. And most of the time, when you have an MMA fighter, if they're particularly good in one area, there's going to be trade-offs. If you have a very high-level grappler, their striking is obviously quite often lacking, and vice versa. So with Alexandre Pantoja, he's got big power in his hands and crushing physicality to his grappling, but the trade-off is that his cardio is very bad. And so the key to beating Pantoja is to make him work extremely hard so that he's not as capable of using his power and grappling control to cause you a problem. That is really the key to beating him. And again, I do think that your average person watching sports in general, not just mixed martial arts, but sports in general, I feel most people misjudge the level of luck that is involved in a fighter's career, either through favourable matchmaking or favourable judging or just something that goes in their favour. Because when you look at a fighter like Pantoja, he has been kind of lucky to be on this run and keep defending his title as often as he has been, because against so many of his recent opponents, he's come so close to losing, and he's had a little bit of luck which has got him over the line and enabled him to get his hand raised. So the question for me is, when does the luck run out? He can't keep doing this forever. He can't get away with, having a good 6 or 7 minutes in a fight and then essentially just trying to survive for the rest of the fight, but having opportunistic moments that still enable him to take down rounds. And I know when I talk like this, I will drive people crazy and so many people will disagree with me, but ultimately that's just the reality of what is happening in Alexandre Pantoja's fights. If you look at the Brandon Moreno fight, Moreno's fight IQ was very, very bad in that matchup. If Moreno would have come into that fight and performed how he had done in the past, throwing a lot of jabs, throwing a lot of leg kicks, he would have systematically broke Pantoja down and outpointed him over a 5-round decision. Instead, for whatever reason, Moreno tried to get into a firefight with a power puncher, come off second best. Moreno won the vast majority of that fight, but gave up takedowns at really bad times, and it cost him. If Brandon Royval had anything that resembled takedown defense, he would have beaten Pantoja easily. And I'm going to show you some clips from that fight to show moments where Pantoja was fading extremely bad and Pantoja would just kind of shoot a takedown. Royval would throw himself to the ground at a point in the fight where if Royval could just defend a basic takedown from a guy that was gassed out of his mind, Royval would have been the flyweight champ. And a similar sort of story to Usyk. His takedown offense was a little bit better than Royval's, but ultimately Usyk gave up bad takedowns at bad times, which enabled Pantoja to steal rounds. The key to beating Pantoja, I'm telling you, the way someone will beat Pantoja is understanding what this guy is going to try and do and being prepared for it. I was very surprised that Usyk wasn't better prepared. I'm also very surprised Royval wasn't very better prepared. But Kai Kara-France has seen both Steve Usyk and Brandon Royval come so close to beating Pantoja now and just miss out by an inch. Surely Kai Kara-France can learn from the blueprint that Usyk and Royval wrote and go one step further to get his hand raised this weekend. If we take a look at the odds on this fight, just like with Topuria, Pantoja's a pretty big favourite. We can see that he's around about a 1.40 favourite, which is minus 250 for an implied probability of 71%. We can see Kara-France is the underdog at average odds of about 2.95, which is going to be plus 195 for an implied probability of 34%. I will say the same about Pantoja that I said about Topuria. Let the odds do the work for you. I don't care if you're Pantoja's training partner, you have inside information, you're his mum, you're his brother, you're his sister. It doesn't matter. In a sport as crazy and chaotic and unpredictable as this, unless the guy you're betting has virtually no way to lose, which Pantoja doesn't because his cardio is very bad, you do not want to be betting guys in this odds range, because in order to make a long-term profit, even just to break even, you've got to hit a 71% win rate, which is exceptionally difficult to do over the long term on a sport as chaotic and unpredictable as MMA. So do yourself a favor, make life easy for yourself, let the odds do the work for you, and only ever consider taking the underdog and, looking for those dog or pass situations where you want to bet on high profile fights like this for entertainment. You're not in my live betting group for whatever reason. If you really want to gamble on a fight like this, your best chance of making money is to not overthink it and just take the underdog, dog or pass, because if you look at the odds on Kai Kara France, it's going to be far easier for you to make a long-term profit at an implied probability of 34%, leaning into the chaos and the insanity of this sport, than it will be to try and make a profit on guys in Pantoja's odds range. Because ultimately, if you bet $1,000 on Pantoja this weekend, you're only making $400 profit. If you're betting $1,000 on Kai Kara France this weekend, you're making $1,950 profit. So you have way more room for error when you bet guys in Kara France's odds range, because you can have a low win rate and still make a long-term profit, or still, hopefully worst case scenario for you, if you pick your spots very carefully, break even and have a whole lot of fun gambling on the sport for entertainment. So like I say, if you're not in my live betting group this weekend for whatever reason, your best chance of making money on this fight from a money line point of view is going to be Kara France. There's just no other way to dress it up. So in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, Kara France is a cardio machine. Very, very, very good cardio. Pantoja has a habit of slowing down a lot as fights wear on. I'll show you a little bit of footage of that in a moment. But before I do, what I want to do with Pantoja is explain to you his fighting style, explain to you what you're likely to get from him this weekend, and I'm going to then explain to you Kara France's fighting style, what that means in the context of this matchup, what Kara France's chances of winning this fight are based on his fighting style, and then I'm going to explain to you what Kara France can do in this fight to use a different game plan and strategy which would dramatically increase his probability of winning. So I know that's a lot for you to take in, but like I say, this is a very complex fight. That's why it's an absolute no-brainer to be in my live betting group, because if you are, you're going to make a profit almost every week over the long term, and you don't have to worry about any of this stuff, because I'm going to do all the work for you, and when the fight's taking place, you're in good hands, because with my commentary, I'm going to be talking you through all of this in the moment, and when an opportunity comes to use the knowledge of our knowledge of these fighters to hit a live bet, I'm going to say bet Kara France at these odds, or Pantoja at these odds. You don't have to stress. You can go chill out, spend time with your family, enjoy life, let me do the hard work, and still turn up every weekend and make a profit on the sport you absolutely love. But if you're not in my live betting group and you want to do all the work yourself, it's no problem. We're going to go into a lot of depth now, and I hope you're going to be able to use this information to make money for yourself. So, where do we even begin? It's a deep-ass fight, this is complex. So, what you usually see from Pantoja is a strategy that we see a lot of power punchers use, where he tries to put you into a defensive shell in an effort to pace himself. So this is a pattern that you will see a lot of guys with bad cardio use, where they almost want to create a deterrent for you to make them work hard. And this is how Brandon Moreno lost the title to Pantoja, because he just didn't fight smart and he fell for that trap. So what Pantoja is basically trying to do is, he does have big power and he is, a very good MMA grappler. So what Pantoja wants you to do is fear him and show him a lot of respect. So he will attack you with blitzing striking combinations, and he will load up on these big combinations and land absolute bombs that will hurt you. And he will, shoot big takedown attempts and put you in really bad positions on the ground. And he hopes that when you feel how formidable he is on the ground, when you feel that crushing grappling control, and when he connects hard with you with one of his punches, you'll feel that power and you'll be very reluctant to attack him, because you don't want to get hit in the face and you don't want to be taken down. Pantoja relies on you feeling that way, because he needs you to feel that way so that he can pace himself. Because what you see Pantoja do in a fight, a 25-minute fight, is he will fluctuate from periods of big explosive attacks and not doing anything for a long period of time. And so what he will do is he will attack you with a big barrage of punches or with a big takedown attempt, and what he hopes from that is that you will then respect him enough to not attack him back. And we've seen Usyk make this mistake. We've seen Brandon Moreno make this mistake, and it does work. And we've seen fighters like Yoel Romero is a really good example, use this tactic throughout his career where he explodes and then he resets and recovers, and he explodes and he resets and recovers. Hector Lombard was a good example of this. Dan Henderson was a good example of this. They will explode, you'll feel their power, and then they'll reset and hope that you won't attack them because they don't want to risk getting countered. That's what Pantoja does. That's his style. And what he hopes is that in that period of recovery time, he catches his breath and he recharges his batteries enough so that when you do start to build a little bit of confidence and start to attack him again, he's recovered enough and built up the energy enough to fire another big attack, which will then put you back in your defensive shell. The guys that cause Pantoja big problems are your guys like Brandon Royvals that don't play that game. The guys like Brandon Royvals that don't give you any time or any space to recover. They stay on your ass, they get in your face, and they force you to engage for the entire 25 minutes. If you take away Pantoja's breaks, he gasses significantly and becomes very beatable, which is why when you go back and watch the Brandon Royval fight, it is super frustrating because there were pivotal moments in that matchup where there were huge momentum swings in Royval's favour, but he had zero takedown defence. So as soon as Pantoja would get close to him, Royval would literally fall on the ground, and then even though Pantoja was tired, he was able to hold Royval down, control him, and win rounds. So Kara France has got the blueprint on how to beat Pantoja. All he needs to do is come in with a game plan and a strategy that is formulated to exploit the repetitive nature of Pantoja's approach to fighting and exploit his weaknesses. So what do we usually see from Kara France? And what do we need to see him do differently, right? That's what we're going to be talking about now before we get into some footage. So what we usually see from Kara France is Kara France kind of bouncing around on the outside, counter-striking. And he's got great footwork, and he's got great movement, and he's got great cardio. And he's very good at playing the role of matador and bouncing around on the outside and picking guys off as they come forward. That style won't be that effective against Pantoja. And the reason being, it's very difficult to win fights from the outside like that. Even though the decision against Albazi was a very, very bad decision, ultimately, over the years, time and time again, we see guys punished by the judges for using counter-striking strategies, because so often forward pressure, aggression, octagon control, all these buzzwords we use, we hear commentators use, which they shouldn't be using because the scoring criteria has changed, but all these buzzwords we know are quite often the deciding factor in close fights, close rounds. And so Kara France doesn't have a judge-pleasing style because he doesn't have that much power in his hands, and when he's bouncing around on the outside, it's hard for him to inflict the kind of damage that's going to leave a lasting impression on the judges' scorecards. So Kara France's usual style doesn't give him a particularly good chance of beating Pantoja, because Pantoja's more likely to be the aggressor, more likely to be on the front foot, and even in those long periods where Pantoja's looking to take breaks, he's still likely to be on the front foot, pushing Kara France backward. So Kara France is in a little bit of a dilemma here, because there is a reason why he fights in that range, and it's because his takedown defense isn't the best. So Kara France likes to bounce around on the outside so that when his opponents shoot in on his legs, he doesn't have to travel back very far to get his back tight to the cage to be able to use the cage to base defend a takedown. We hit a huge winner in my live betting group recently on Waldo Cortez Acosta to beat Sergey Spivak, and you would have seen Waldo Cortez Acosta use the same sort of strategy, which was one of the main reasons why I live bet him at big underdog odds. It was because Cortez Acosta was on the outside, staying relatively close to the cage, so when Spivak would shoot a takedown, Cortez Acosta wouldn't have to travel back very far to use the cage as a base to defend the takedown. It's a very, very effective strategy, but it does force fighters to fight in a range which isn't always favoured by judges. And so if Kara France fights in that range this weekend. I think this fight is likely to be very close, but Pantoja's forward pressure and aggression is likely to make it very difficult for Kara-France to win a decision. So in order for Kara-France to come into this matchup this weekend with a game plan and strategy that gives him the best chance of beating Pantoja, he does need to show courage, and he does need to be brave, and he does need to do things a little bit differently. I'm not saying he can't win with the strategy that he usually uses, but that's not going to give him the best chance. If I was in Kara-France's team and I was helping him formulate a game plan and strategy to give him the best chance of winning this weekend, what I'm about to say next is what I would say to Kara-France. So when you watch footage on Pantoja, there is a very clear pattern where, like I say, he only really does two things. He will explode forward with big blitzing combinations on the feet, or he will commit very hard to takedowns in an effort to get the fight to the ground. So when Pantoja does either of these things, it's very, very important to just let him have that moment and just weather the storm and just deal with whatever attack he's throwing at you. So if he's coming forward and blitzing forward with these big combinations, don't try and plant your feet and counter, because the guy's got a granite chin. He's tough as nails, and you're not going to be able to match him with power anyway. I know Kara-France knocked out Usyk, but, you know, Kara-France isn't the most dangerous striker, and Pantoja's a lot more powerful than him. So when Pantoja blitzes forward, best thing you can do is utilize your good footwork, your good movement, cover up, circle away. The other thing you're going to see Pantoja do is commit very hard to takedowns. What you want to do as soon as you see that level change coming, you want to back up, try and clear your legs, try and get your back over to the cage, get those underhooks in play early, and just shut down Pantoja's attempt to, you know, get you to the ground as quickly as possible. Don't give your back up. Don't try and fire back. Don't be throwing any knees or any short shots or anything like that. Don't be throwing strikes in the clinch. Only focus on defending that takedown. Now, when you see Pantoja attack with these blitzing attacks or, you know, these big takedown attempts, when he fails on both, so when he resets from those striking combinations, or when he has a takedown stuffed and has to reset and go back to the middle of the octagon, you'll see him take a big visible deep breath, and I will show you some footage of that in a moment. When he takes that big visible deep breath, get on his ass. The big mistake pretty much all of Pantoja's opponents have made over the last few years is they don't get on his ass. So when he attacks them with a big blitzing power punch combination and then backs off, it's almost like they want to have a little break as well, because they're like, oh fuck, like, you know what I mean, either that hurt or fuck, I'm glad he stopped throwing, like I'm going to take a breather now as well. Or when he shoots a takedown attempt and they stuff it, it was tiring to stuff that takedown attempt, right? So they want a little bit of recovery and they want to catch their breath a little bit. And in that moment, that's giving Pantoja, who has awful cardio, a chance to recover. When you see Pantoja attack with that flurry of punches or try to take you down and then reset, get on his ass. Do not give him any space to breathe. You go, you go, you go. And it doesn't matter what you do. You could try and take him down. It doesn't really matter. Just make sure you clear your legs. You don't get overly aggressive and overexpose yourself to a reactive double leg, which is the mistake Brandon Royval made. But in a controlled, extremely aggressive way, get on his ass. Do not take that, or do not give him an opportunity to have that period of recovery. You get on him, and if you stay on him and you pepper him with jabs and pepper him with leg kicks, pepper him with strikes, he's not going to have that period to recover and pace himself over the 25 minutes, and he is going to rapidly gas out as the fight progresses and look way more tired than he usually does. We saw how tired he was looking against Brandon Royval. Royval's lack of takedown defense cost him, but Kara-France's takedown defense is a lot better than Brandon Royval's. And if Kara-France can stay on his ass and not be a passive counter striker, he can go one step further than Royval and get his hand raised. So the real question this weekend, when we're trying to predict Kara-France's probability of winning, is, are we going to see Kara-France bounce around on the outside like he usually does and try and win a point fighting contest? Or is he going to fight smart, look at the weaknesses that Pantoja has demonstrated in past fights, come out the gate with a game plan and a strategy that is well capable of causing Pantoja big problems and resulting in Kara France becoming the new flyweight champ? Unfortunately, and this is why we've done so well live betting the sport over the years, it's impossible to know what a fighter is thinking and what they're going to do. This is why our edge is huge in live betting. This is why my speciality is live betting this sport. Because I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you what Kara France is going to do this weekend. If you come to me and you say this weekend, Kai is going to fight like he usually does, fight like he does against Albazi, bounce around on the outside, use the cage to defend takedowns, point fight a little bit, I'd be like, cool, he's probably going to lose a decision. If you came out this weekend and you said, Chris, I've spoken to Kai, knows exactly what he needs to do to win. He's going to use the cage and counter-striking defensively to protect himself when Pantoja blitzes forward and attacks takedowns. But as soon as those takedown attempts fail, or he stuffs them, or he absorbs all those shots and circles away, he's going to get right on Pantoja's ass and it'll be like, yo, Kara France going to be one of my biggest bets of the year. But unfortunately, like I say, I don't have a crystal ball and I don't know what he's going to do. Fighters are creatures of habit. What I can tell you is that fighters usually do what they've always done, right? Every week we go into an ungodly amount of depth on every single fight, on every single UFC card, from the highest profile UFC fight to the very first prelim. You know, we hit a big winner last weekend on Mohamed Usman in live betting. Why? Because it was the very first fight on the card that most people didn't care about, but we took the time to do a ton of research on Abdel Wahab and Mohamed Usman, so we were very well prepared to profit as soon as we saw that momentum swing in Mohamed Usman's favour. And he was big underdog odds. Other people weren't as prepared as us. That's our edge. So our edge now, live betting a fight like this, is understanding what Kara France needs to do to win. That's our edge. We don't know if he's going to do it, which means placing a pre-fight bet is risky. But when we're sat down in our pants on Saturday night, live betting this one, as the fight is playing out, we can start to spot signs and patterns and indications that Kara France is going to do things that gives him a very good chance of winning. That's our edge. So for me personally, I'm not going to put my money at risk before a punch is thrown, because I don't know what game plan and strategy Kara France is going to use. But I have explained to you what game plan and strategy he needs to use, and it'll be very interesting to see if he uses that. Now what I'm going to do is just show you a little bit of footage of Pantoja so you can kind of understand his strengths and weaknesses, these patterns, and also these issues that I've been talking about with Pantoja's fighting style that does make him quite predictable. So I'm now going to show you the fight between Pantoja and Usyk, because it's a really good matchup for highlighting that repeatable pattern that Pantoja falls into of aggressive attacks and then periods of inactivity while he looks to recover. So early in fights, Pantoja is very aggressive. He's obviously fresh, so you're not going to see this pattern play out as much. But generally with Pantoja, the longer the fight goes, the bigger the gaps you see from him in between attacks, and the more he starts to look to pace himself. With Pantoja, winning the early rounds of fights is also super important, because he knows in the second half of the fight he's probably going to be struggling pretty bad. So I think that's another one of the reasons why Pantoja is very aggressive in the early rounds, because he knows his chances of winning rounds 3, 4 and 5 when he starts to get tired isn't good, especially in the flyweight division where so many fighters can fight at a high pace and have great cardio, like your Royvals, your Usyks, your Morenos, your Kara Frances. So the first round isn't too relevant for us here. We will skip into the second round, because obviously the pattern that I'm talking about is not really going to present itself in round 1, but it does start to creep in round 2. So remember, the pattern that you're looking for is big explosive attacks from Pantoja, where he's basically looking to stamp his authority, establish control in the fight, and put you in a defensive shell. So we're seeing it here at the beginning of round 2. He's coming forward with these big winging shots, and now he's working for a takedown. So in this fight, we're not going to focus too much on the specific positions. We're just focusing on that pattern. So we're, 30 seconds into round 2. And you can see he's attacked Usyk aggressively. Now what you're going to see is him reset, go back to the middle of the octagon, and he's going to take a little bit of a breather here. So you can see this is a real big tell with Pantoja. So in the first round, very aggressive. As soon as this round starts, very aggressive. He's trying to put you in a defensive shell. He's trying to gain respect in there. But watch what he does here now. So you'll see this pattern play out in all of his fights. When Usyk now comes forward, look at the body language between the two. So whereas for most of round 1, he was very aggressive, and at the beginning of this round, he was very aggressive. Now watch what he does when Usyk comes forward here. So notice there, as Usyk comes forward, Pantoja takes a backward step, circles away. Watch. As Usyk comes forward, right? As he's coming forward, Pantoja's just looking to circle away. Just looking to circle away. He'll throw the odd shot to back you up, but he's not looking to engage. As every time Usyk comes forward, notice how Pantoja backs up and circles to his right. Now, this is the pattern that I'm talking about. He then blitzes forward. Why? Because of sustained pressure from Usyk. So you've got Pantoja circling on the outside, and Usyk keeps coming forward. Usyk's not throwing a lot, but he's putting Pantoja on the back foot in that uncomfortable range. So Pantoja here is thinking to himself, this guy isn't respecting me. I need him to back up, leave me alone, give me space to breathe. Because it's still tiring to be circling away from your opponent like that. So here he blitzes forward, and he's like, hopefully now he gets the message, right? I've blitzed forward, hopefully now he leaves me alone. And you see Pantoja now will go into the same pattern where when Usyk comes forward, he's just going to look to back up and circle away to his right. We see him go into that repeatable pattern here, where he's not really landing a whole lot. Usyk comes forward and he'll just back up, circle away. Back up, circle away. Of course, he's going to throw the odd shot here and there, but for the most part, you see it here, right? Again, little bit passive from Pantoja, and then he comes forward and looks for this takedown. Now, remember what I said a few moments ago. The frequency, the time in between attacks and periods of inactivity while he's recovering, that changes as the fight progresses. So the more tired he gets, the longer you have in between blitzing attacks. So there, he didn't have very long between blitzing attacks at all because we're only in round 2. But you'll see as the fight progresses, he becomes less aggressive with blitzing forward to try and basically deter you from attacking him. So here we're midway through round 2. And again, same range. And every time Usyk comes forward, Pantoja is going to try and circle away from him. Like there, because he's already demonstrating tired body language just 7.5 minutes into the fight. I mean, look at how tired he looks here, right? Look at this. An unanswered left hook, and he just kind of circles away looking tired. Notice there, this is why our edge is so big in live betting, because we spot these patterns. Look at the visible deep breath that Pantoja takes as he circles off to his right here. So a few moments ago in round 1, the beginning of round 2, Pantoja, every time Usyk come forward and attacked him, he would be responding, he would be countering, right? Now he doesn't even have the energy to do that, and we're only 7.5 minutes in. Look at the big deep breath he takes here. Watch. In through his nose, right out through his mouth. 7.5 minutes in. And then look at the tired body language from him here. Lazy kick. Lazy kick. And he's just trying to circle away to his right, right? Unanswered shots. Every time Usyk's coming forward, unanswered shots, just circling away. More of the same. Now, what are you going to see soon? You're going to see a blitzing attack where he either comes forward, lets his hands go, or attempts a takedown. He circles away, he circles away, he circles away, still circling away, and any minute now, any second, you'll see him blitz forward to try and alleviate the pressure he's under. So now he's caught his breath for 30, 40 seconds. Now he's going to start to come forward because you've given him an opportunity to recover. Now you're starting to see him throw. And look, he's coming forward, eating shots, but But that's the blitzing attack there and the takedown attempt. And it's that repeatable pattern. And as the fight progresses, he gets more and more tired, more and more sloppy, and longer breaks in between attacks. So we'll see it again in this third round. Again, I'm trying to like strike the balance here of not having a super long breakdown for this fight, but showing you everything that you need to see. So where I'm trying to get through this as quickly as possible. I know I'm repeating myself quite a lot, but I'm just trying to get it to sink in for you guys, so that when you're betting this fight, you know exactly what to expect from both guys, really. As we're watching this repeatable pattern play out, I'm done describing it. You can see this for yourself right now. But this is where I want to talk about the mistakes that Usyk made, the traps Kara-France could possibly fall into, and what Kara-France can do differently to win this weekend. So we alluded to this earlier in the breakdown for this fight. But the big mistake that Usyk makes in this fight, and what you'll see Royval do differently when I show you a bit of footage of that, is Usyk, even though he's coming forward and putting pressure on Pantoja and putting Pantoja on the back foot, he's not actually really doing very much, and he's not actually really making Pantoja work hard. Yes, Usyk is walking him down and pressuring him and forcing him to fight in an uncomfortable range, which is good, but if Usyk was pumping the jab, peppering him with leg kicks, forcing Pantoja to defend takedowns in this position, Pantoja wouldn't be getting these periods of recovery to still be competitive within this fight. And that's the real big error that Usyk makes here. You can see him here. It's quite clear that Pantoja is trying to catch his breath and avoid engaging after the blitzing attack we just saw. It's quite clear Pantoja is just circling away and recharging his batteries. But Usyk doesn't make him pay. He's not letting his hands go. He's literally not doing anything. Look at this. And then Pantoja's caught his breath and he can blitz forward again. Right? Usyk just isn't doing enough. Which means Pantoja doesn't gas anywhere near as much as he could. So we're going to go into round 5 now. Because again, I don't want to make this breakdown super long. And then we'll show you a bit of the Royval footage. So this is round 5. So, close fight up until this point. Probably 2 rounds apiece at this point. There you go, Sean Sheehan with the scorecard. So, Usyk takes Pantoja down, which is obviously a great start to the round. But, like a fly to the spider's web or a moth flying into the bug zapper, Pantoja wants to be on the ground with you. And so as soon as you start mixing it up with a high-level grappler like Pantoja, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. So anyway, Pantoja exerts a decent amount of energy in this grappling position. Usyk defends it, gets back up. And now you know exactly what to expect, right? You know Pantoja isn't going to want to engage with you. He's going to want to circle on the outside after exerting all that energy. And he's going to want to avoid engaging while he recharges batteries. So you can see, just like earlier in the fight, Usyk coming forward, Pantoja looking to circle away, catch his breath, recharges batteries, but Usyk just not really doing a whole lot. And you can see Pantoja is just, recharging his batteries, biding his time to commit really hard to the next takedown attempt. It's such a predictable style of fighting, but Usyk just doesn't read it. You can see here, they've been back up at this point for about, 40 seconds, and Usyk is just allowing Pantoja to recover instead of staying on him. And any second now, just like earlier in the fight, Pantoja will have recharged his batteries, caught his breath to the extent where he's got enough energy to shoot a really big takedown attempt again. And this fight ultimately would have come down to whether or not Pantoja would have got it, because it's 2 rounds apiece going into this 5th round. Usyk's got momentum swinging in his favour. He's the pressure fighter. Pantoja's wearing more visible damage. If Usyk would have kept this 5th round standing, very good chance he would have won this fight. Very, very good chance he would have won this fight. You can see tired body language from Pantoja as he circles away. But you know what's coming. You know what's coming. And Usyk goes for the takedown, which enables Pantoja to win the scramble, obtain top position at the business end of the round. It's bad fight IQ from Usyk. Very, very bad fight IQ. So what we're going to do now is take a look at the Brandon Royval fight. Because the Royval fight's a little bit different. The Royval fight shows you what you can achieve if you do not give him a chance to recover. Now, I'm conscious this breakdown video for this fight is getting pretty long. So I think what I should do is zip ahead a little and go a bit deeper into the fight. So if we go to round 2, and we'll skim through from here. So in this fight, there were lots of sequences like this, where Royval would be having a lot of success on the feet, and Pantoja would be clearly getting tired, but Royval would not have the takedown defense to keep the fight standing, and he'd basically just fall over like that, which would not punish Pantoja for getting tired. So, like, if you look at this round 3, like, look at how easily Royval goes down here. Practically just falls over, right? So we'll skip ahead. Royval's back up. Now, look at the body language from Pantoja here when he gets back up. Just look at the body language here. Speed it up a little. Look at this, just coming up now. Look at this, how tired he looks. Tired body language. And you know what Pantoja wants to do here. He wants to take a break, right? You can see him taking big deep breaths through his nose, trying to back up, circle away like he did against Usyk. But Royval doesn't make the same mistake that Usyk does. Royval stays on him. He pumps the jab. He's constantly throwing shots. He's constantly making Pantoja engage. So where Pantoja is trying to circle away and catch his breath, Royval isn't letting him. Royval is forcing him to work hard. And so Pantoja is starting to struggle very, very bad in this fight. And he's looking way more tired against Royval in round 3 than he did against Usyk. The problem is, Royval didn't have any takedown defense at all. So even though he had Pantoja on the ropes here and in a lot of trouble, as soon as Pantoja would shoot a takedown attempt, Royval would literally just fall to the ground. Like you see it here, right? So Pantoja shoots the takedown attempt. Royval does a good job of stuffing it, underhooks in play, getting the fight back to the middle of the octagon, peppering Pantoja with strikes. But time and time again, Royval just gives up a cheap takedown and completely negates all the good work that he did on the feet. You see it here. Just goes down easily. Just practically falls over. And around 4, again, gives up a cheap takedown. Practically falls over again. And then in the final round, kind of see it here. So same sort of shit really, just Pantoja looking very tired on the outside, Royval picking him off. You look at how slow the hand speed is of Pantoja now. And that's why it's so important to make a guy like Pantoja work hard early. Because if you do, you can take a lot of their power away in the second half of the fight. You can tire them out to the point where they just simply don't have the pop in their shots to hurt you in the second half of the matchup. And that's why now Royval is able to walk Pantoja down with impunity. Because Pantoja simply just doesn't have the energy to hurt him now. He doesn't have the power in his hands to hurt him. You see Royval just absolutely peppering him. And look at the difference, right? Royval never stops throwing. Usyk is walking Pantoja down, but there's no end product. He's not throwing anything. Royval's throwing big combinations, jabs. He's peppering Pantoja. He's not giving him any recovery time. Problem with Royval, kept giving up cheap takedowns. And ultimately, that's what cost him. So, let's bring this full circle. And let's wrap this breakdown up so that you know what to feel about this fight from a betting point of view. So, my perspective on this fight is, if Kara-France fights like he usually does, he's probably just going to bounce around Pantoja all night, look to point fight from the outside, give Pantoja those periods that he needs to recover in between exchanges, and Kara-France is probably going to lose a decision. If Kara-France uses the blueprint that Brandon Royval wrote in staying on Pantoja and pressuring him and throwing a high volume of strikes, but defending the takedowns, which Kara-France is capable of doing, his takedown offense is far better than Royval's, then he stands a great chance of winning. But Kara-France has to be more aggressive than usual. And if he is more aggressive than usual, I think we'll have a new champion on Saturday night. We'll see how it goes. It's a great fight for betting. It's an even better fight for live betting. And I'm very confident we can make some money on a fight like this. So, hopefully in my live betting group. If you're not, I'm really hoping all that information gives you a really good chance of making your own decisions on this fight, which you can hopefully turn into some cash. So in terms of the over-under on this one, very likely the fight goes deep in my opinion. Gun to my head, if I was going to bet the over-under on this one, I would take the over. If you look at Kara-France's record, he frequently goes to a decision when facing a decent level of opponent. And if you look at Pantoja's record, been to a decision in 3 of his last 4. We know Kara-France is very well-rounded. Pretty good chance this one goes to a decision as well. And in terms of most likely outcomes, I think most likely outcome is Pantoja by decision, but the odds are absolutely terrible. Don't bother with Kara-France by decision, because in percentage terms, Kara-France by decision, the odds aren't a whole lot better than Kara-France money line. So no point in getting cute on that. If you really want to bet the co-main event, just take Kara-France money line, dog or pass. I know that the breakdown videos are uploaded late this week, but it's literally fights like this that are the reason why. It's such a good matchup. Brandon Royval against Josh Van is one of the best fights I can remember in a long time. And you just have to spend so much time researching fights like this to understand the strengths and weaknesses of both guys, to give us a big edge live betting on fights like this. You can make a lot of money in live betting, and the big part of the profit, the success we have, comes from understanding the sport on a very deep level. So I know it is annoying that the breakdown videos are uploaded late, but on the plus side, the reason why they're late is because we have to spend so much time learning about the strengths and weaknesses of fighters in matchups that are as spectacular as this. And UFC 317, for me personally, it's probably the best event of the year for betting. I'm really looking forward to it. Obviously, we've already got a lot of bets, and we make a profit almost every week live betting on this sport. I've been hitting some really nice big juicy underdogs recently, and I'm confident we're going to hit more on Saturday night. So I'm looking forward to sharing my research with you on this one. Hopefully we can profit from this fight. It's such a good stylistic matchup. Again, with so much depth to a fight like this, where do we even begin? We'll start with the odds. So at the moment, both guys are in the even money odds range, where Van is a slight favourite at average odds of about 1.83, which is going to be minus 120 for an implied probability of 55%. If we take a look at the odds on Royval, he's around an average of, say, 2.0, which is going to be plus 100 for an implied probability of 50%. So Van is 23 years old, 5'5", with a 65-inch reach, and Royval is 32 years old, 5'9", with a 68-inch reach. So Royval's obviously got that long, tall style. Van is shorter, has the shorter reach, but Van is obviously a very high-level boxer, very high-level MMA striker. There is a big age gap between these two, but other than inexperience from Van, I don't think it really has too much of an impact on this fight. So, obviously it's a classic striker versus grappler matchup. Fundamentally, Van has a style that is very much based on boxing, and Brandon Royval's style is predominantly Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But what we have seen from Royval is he's improved his striking exponentially to the point where now he can hang on the feet against pretty much anyone in the division. And whilst Royval doesn't really have the best offensive wrestling because he's long and lean and lanky, and doesn't really have that physicality to drag his opponents to the ground, Royval looks to create chaos on the feet with volume and pressure and his high work rate, in the hopes that in some way the fight will end up going to the ground. Maybe his opponent shoots a panic takedown to alleviate the pressure that he's putting on him, or maybe he'll be able to jump on top of him after landing something big in a crazy scramble, and that's how he's going to be able to use his high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to cause his opponent a problem. So when we're assessing how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, I think with Royval having, a big edge on the ground, something that we do want to focus on and spend some time thinking about is how likely it is that Royval is going to be able to keep this fight on the ground, where he can kind of tie Van up, put him in difficult positions and rack up points. So based on past performances, Van's takedown offense and ground game, I can't really talk too much about what his ground game is like because we haven't really seen him on the ground very much, but his takedown offense is certainly pretty good. What I would say is that it's not bulletproof. So I'm not going to show you a bunch of footage now of Van being taken down, but if you go and watch his fight against Topuria or Cody Durden, you can see situations where both guys have very briefly got him down, but he has been able to quickly work his way back up to his feet. That's interesting to me because what it shows is that Royval could potentially get this fight to the ground, but Royval's going to have to work very, very hard to keep the fight on the ground. Topuria, as an example, is a more physically imposing offensive wrestler with better grappling control than Royval, and he really struggled to hold Van down. So Royval isn't going to be able to hold Van down easily, but Royval does have a long, lean, skinny frame. Nice back takes, slick back takes. He can trap his opponents in deep body triangles with those long legs. So even though it won't be easy for Royval to take Van down and control him, I wouldn't rule it out completely. Because with the amount of chaos that Royval creates in the octagon, his opponents do quite often get overloaded. And when they're overloaded, they're more likely to make mistakes. And Van's takedown offense, like I say, isn't bulletproof. And with a guy like Royval that's got slick back takes, doesn't even necessarily need to get you down. He might just need to get you up against the cage and start working for a back take from that position. But based on past performances, Van's takedown offense very good at working his way back up to his feet when he gets taken down. Royval is kind of stiff and upright and rigid, so not the best offensive wrestler. As a result, not going to be easy for Royval to get this fight to the ground, and as a result we should see a lot of this fight standing. So whilst we can all accept and agree that if the fight goes to the ground, Royval's going to have a huge advantage, hopefully we can all accept and agree that if the fight stays standing, Van has a huge advantage as well. And of course I'm talking simply in terms of technical ability. At the end of the day, if fights were always decided by who was the more technically skilled fighter, I would be a billionaire, and so would you, because it's very easy for anybody to study footage of two fighters and determine who is the more technically skilled. I could train 5-year-olds to do it. But GSP famously said that fighting was 90% mental, and we know a lot more goes into the outcome of fights than simply just technique. If technique was the only thing that was considered, to decide the outcome of UFC fights, Dricus du Plessis wouldn't even be in the top 10, yet he is the middleweight champ. So when we look at Josh Van, we've got one of the best technical boxers in the UFC. He's only 23 years old, he's getting better from fight to fight, and the guy is extremely technical, extremely skilled. Royval has made big improvements to his striking. He does use his length better now. He is better defensively than he used to be, but he is a bit of a sitting duck on the feet. He still has bad defense, and he still doesn't move his head a whole lot. What I like about Royval is that it's difficult to settle into a rhythm against him because he doesn't stop throwing, which constantly disrupts your rhythm and what you're trying to do. So even though he's not the most technical, because he's always peppering you with those long jabs and those long rangey kicks, it's difficult to kind of settle into a rhythm and get comfortable because you always having to react to what he is doing. So while he might not be as technical as Van, not many guys in the UFC throw a higher volume of strikes than Brandon Royval, and that's always going to present problems and challenges because Royval isn't going to slow down like a lot of the guys that may look to throw the same volume as him. So with Josh Van, we have seen in the past guys have some success against him on the feet, but with the pressure that he puts on them, they usually fade, and then that's when he takes over. What's interesting about this matchup is now that he's facing a step up in competition, he's going to be facing those top flyweights that aren't going to be as likely to fade and fold and start to tire when he starts to put his foot down, and Royval certainly won't tire. So in terms of how they match up when it comes to striking, I would expect a lot of volume from Royval, a lot of jabs, a lot of those long rangey kicks, and I would expect Van to be kind of bobbing and weaving and moving his foot, moving forward, trying to get inside. What's very interesting about the way these two match up when it comes to striking is that they both like to lead, so they both like to be the aggressor. If you watch their past fights, Van likes to be on the front foot, taking control of the center of the octagon, putting his opponents on the back foot and forcing them to counter strike on the outside. And Royval likes to do that as well. And that makes for an interesting dynamic here because both guys can't have what they want. One of them is going to have to counter strike and one of them is going to have to take a backward step. Now, the fighter that usually has to make an adjustment in matchups like this, where you've got two aggressive guys that are going to meet head on and no one's going to want to take a backward step, the guy that usually comes out on top in situations like this and is allowed to be the aggressor is the guy that hits harder, is better defensively, and is generally more aggressive, like naturally in his DNA. And that all points to Josh Van. He does hit a lot harder than Royval, does have better footwork, better movement. Naturally, he's always been a pressure fighter, whereas Royval is a BJJ guy who evolved into a pressure fighter. So it's going to be very difficult for Royval to push Van backwards. Also because Royval, with him not being a natural striker, counter-striking is going to be very uncomfortable for him. So fighting on the back foot and landing effective strikes while moving backward is one of the most difficult aspects of mixed martial arts and striking in general. And Royval's only just got to the point where he's, effective on the front foot. So if he starts to get pushed on the back foot, I can't see him being very effective at all. But Royval's also a tough guy that isn't going to want to take a backward step. And he may just choose to stand his ground, play rock'em sock'em robots, not take a backward step, and go toe-to-toe with Van. It wouldn't be a particularly good idea because Van's great in the pocket and he hits a lot harder than Royval. But we have seen Van rocked, wobbled, dropped multiple times in the UFC. And Royval is certainly a much more dangerous striker than he used to be. After all, he did hurt Kai Kara-France extremely bad when they fought with his strikes. Now Kara-France is fighting for a title this weekend. So, in terms of what to expect from these two on the feet, I would expect it to be very difficult for Royval, but his volume can make the skill gap, the technical gap, closer because of the sheer volume that he puts on you. And something else you'll notice about Josh Van is that he is a bit of a slow starter. So Van almost always loses round one and then gets progressively more aggressive, progressively, more active as the fight progresses. So this is one of those matchups where, there is a bit of an intangible to consider for sure, in that Van, unfortunately, in his early 20s is a little bit chinny. He does get rocked, wobbled, dropped a lot. And both these guys are very aggressive, both very chaotic. I would expect there to be some pretty big exchanges in this fight, which does open the door for Royval to actually knock Van out or hurt him pretty bad on the feet. I certainly think Royval is a more dangerous striker than Charles Johnson, and we all remember what happened in that fight. But if we take a step back and we consider the strengths and weaknesses of both fighters, and we consider what is the most likely outcome. For me, the most likely outcome here is Van neutralizes the threat of Royval's grappling and keeps the fight standing, and then Van, being the more technically skilled striker, just outstrikes Royval. That's the most likely outcome. He lands the cleaner, harder shots. He exploits Royval's poor defense. The kind of volume pepper shots, the jabs, the range-finding kicks that Royval likes to throw don't really cause Van too many problems, and Van just kind of walks Royval down and lights him up. That's the most likely outcome based on past performances. But where things get a little bit murky and a little bit unpredictable is, like I say, Royval's very aggressive, very dangerous. He finds ways to win. He's got a strong way to win. He's got kind of like that X factor, that intangible, that element of danger. Whereas Van, a little bit fragile, gets rocked, wobbled, dropped a lot. Royval is the exact kind of guy that will cause Van a problem. But skill for skill, technique for technique, Van's far more technically skilled than Royval, and will probably win a stand-up fight here. So in terms of the over-under on this one, most likely outcome is this fight actually goes deep. This fight goes to a decision because they're both so tough, both so well-rounded. They both do have great cardio. We've both seen them put in very bad positions in the past and fight through it. However, what I would say is we have seen Van get rocked, wobbled, dropped multiple times in past fights. We know both these guys are very aggressive. And if Royval does choose to stand his ground and fire back, something's got to give. If you've got two guys that are going to meet head on and neither of them is going to want to counter strike and neither of them is going to want to take a backward step, something has to give. They can't do that for 15 minutes without someone getting killed and sent to the Shadow Realm. So on that basis, with that dynamic being a legit possibility based on the way both these guys usually fight, I would say, it would be very dangerous to bet on this fight to go to decision at very steep favourite odds. If you do want to bet the over-under on this one, I would just say let the odds do the work for you. Take the under based on the fact that both these guys are super aggressive and they're both super dangerous. They also both kind of have the killer instinct as well. So in terms of the most likely outcome for the props, I think Van by decision is the most likely outcome, which is why the odds are so bad. Royval by decision in percentage terms not a whole lot better than his money line odds, so that's a bit dead as well. Do you know what? I will say this. Royval to win by knockout or TKO 7.5 plus 650. That feels a little bit wide, just based on the fact of how often we've seen Van get rocked and wobbled and dropped in fights. He got wobbled by Cherez, knocked out by Charles Johnson. Does get wobbled a lot. So I would have liked the odds to be a bit better than that. But, if Royval can hurt Kara France on the feet, he can certainly hurt Josh Van on the feet. So, yeah, if you want to sprinkle a little bit of money, make watching the fight more interesting, that's something you want to go for. But if I were to bet this fight, I would go Josh Van, but accept that Royval is an absolute buzzsaw, and accept that this one is likely to be a war that could go either way, and just accept you're probably better off live betting this one with me in my live betting group. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's analyse another absolutely brilliant fight between Beneil Dariush and Renato Moicano, and this fight is another good example of why the breakdown videos are so late this week. It is such an interesting matchup with so much footage available on both guys, and when you get cards like this that feature a lot of epic fights like this, it just takes longer to research, because if we want to be well prepared to live bet these fights and make money, we need to do a lot of research so that when it comes to live betting the fights, we're very well prepared. We've got a ton of knowledge we can draw on from recent memory to get our money into strong positions and to predict how these fights are likely to go as they're happening. So this is another fantastic fight, and it really sums up how good this card is. I'm not exaggerating when I say this is the best card for betting I've seen in a very long time. We've already got a good amount of pre-fight bets, and I'm expecting to do pretty well live betting this card as well. And so yeah, I'm really looking forward to sharing my research with you, in terms of how Dariush and Moicano match up, and hopefully we can use this research to make some cash on Saturday night. I'm very confident that we will. So Dariush and Moicano, there's a lot of similarities between them. They're both 36 years old. You can see Dariush is 36, Moicano's 36, and they're also about the same size as well. Moicano 5'11", 72-inch reach, Dariush 5'10", 72-inch reach. They're also both primarily grapplers. They both have a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, who have more of a reputation in their entire UFC career for being strikers, but of course Moicano in the last few years has evolved into more of a grappler. So we know that this is a young man's sport, and we know that both Dariush and Moicano at 36 years old, they're going to be declining from fight to fight. What we also know is that it's going to be a lot easier for us to predict what version of Moicano we're going to get on Saturday, because he has been quite active over the last few years. If we look at Moicano's record, we can see that he fought 3 times in 2024, so there's a good amount of recent footage available on him. Whereas Dariush, he hasn't fought in a really long time. We haven't seen him since December 2023. And his last 2 fights ended pretty quick, combined total of just 5 minutes, around about that amount. And so you've got to go all the way back to 2022, almost 3 years ago, for the last time we got a good look at Dariush, and he could have declined a lot since then. That does make trying to predict the outcome of this fight before it takes place very difficult, because if you analyse the most likely way this fight is going to go based on past performances, this is a very good stylistic matchup for Dariush and a very bad stylistic matchup for Moicano, and I'll get into the reasons why shortly. But where this fight becomes complicated from a pre-fight betting point of view is we don't know what version of Dariush we're going to get, because we haven't seen him in so long. 2022 is the last time we had a real good look at him, and a lot can change at this stage in a fighter's career, when they're 36 years old, when they've had almost 30 pro fights, and when, father time is coming knocking. The version of Dariush we got on Saturday night at 36 years old could look very, very different, much, much worse than the version we got back in 2022 against Gamrot, and at the very least, he's unlikely to look any better. So that adds a layer of uncertainty to this matchup, but if I'm assessing who's more likely to win just based on the past performances, the footage we've got, you've got to go with Dariush. I'll explain why, but fundamentally, if you don't have time to watch the whole breakdown, I think from an MMA point of view, Dariush is better than Moicano everywhere. So let's break down those individual areas that this fight could take place and explain why I heavily favour Dariush here. So both these guys have got a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and we know throughout their careers, for the most part, they're known more as strikers than grapplers. Moicano has used a lot more grappling in recent years, but that was because his chin started to go. Even though these guys have got a base in, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, most people view both these guys as strikers. And so a lot of people probably do favour Moicano in this fight, because he's been having a lot of success with his grappling in recent years, whereas Dariush may be viewed as more of a striker. But I can assure you that Dariush is a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and it's going to be difficult for Moicano to have success on the ground. I'm not saying that Moicano, can't out-grapple Dariush. I'm just saying, based on past performances, it won't be easy. And if you look at Moicano's record, you will notice a bit of a trend where he has a lot of success against low-level grapplers and looks like the fucking Brazilian Khabib. But as soon as he runs into guys that are semi-decent grapplers, it's not... he doesn't have it all his own way, shall we say. So, Brad Riddell, Drew Dober, Jalen Turner, Benoit Saint-Denis definitely got exposed on the ground in that fight. But, you look at Riddell, Dober, Turner, we know they're all pretty low-level grapplers. And then when he faces decent grapplers, Makhachev and Rafael dos Anjos, he struggles to get his grappling game going. And as a result, struggles very bad in those fights. So this matchup is interesting because we know that Moicano's biggest issue is that his chin is totally shot, totally gone, and against anyone in the division, he's going to be a constant sitting duck to the knockout. And at this stage in Moicano's career, it's going to be difficult to outstrike anyone in the division. He just can't take a shot anymore. He is super fragile. He's made of glass. And so if Dariush can keep this fight standing, so long as he hasn't declined like a lot from back in 2022 when we last got a good look at him, he should be able to light Moicano up, win the fight on the feet, outstrike Moicano pretty comfortably and probably knock him out. Dariush has got hard, damaging, nasty, impactful kicks, good boxing. Like I say, he inflicts a lot of damage, got a nice Muay Thai, and Dariush's striking is just a lot more deadly than Moicano's. Moicano has always been a volume striker, likes to dance around, stay behind the jab, touch you, point fight, whereas Dariush can really hurt you. So as long as Dariush hasn't declined tons since the Gamrot fight that took place in 2022, it should be all Dariush on the feet. I don't really give Moicano much of a chance of winning a stand-up fight here. So then we have to start considering, whether Moicano could use a grappling heavy game plan to win this fight against Dariush. And that won't be easy either. Gamrot couldn't take Dariush down and hold him down. Dariush, a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, very scrambly on the ground, very difficult to control, dangerous himself on the ground. And it's possible he might actually have the advantage on the ground over Moicano. Now, the one edge that I would give Moicano throughout his career, if we look at his entire body of work compared to Dariush's entire body of work, is that Moicano's cardio generally is a lot better than Dariush. Dariush does have a bit of a tendency to slow down. However, Moicano randomly and badly gassed against Drew Dober without exerting that much energy in that fight. And so we can't be totally sure Moicano would be able to kind of out-cardio and outwork Dariush either, especially with him being 36 years old and, inconsistent performances starting to creep in, which we kind of got against Drew Dober, where he looked absolutely terrible and got kind of lucky. Dober beat himself in that fight. So this is one of those matchups where, based on past performances, if you're just making betting decisions based on what the footage shows, you have to heavily favour Dariush here. And if I were betting this fight, I would only consider taking Dariush, because from my perspective, he's better than Moicano everywhere apart from cardio. Significantly better striker and a good enough grappler to prevent Moicano from having any success on the ground. Now, the problem is, it's a dangerous game to play betting on 36-year-old fighters who you haven't really seen in 3 years, because who knows how he looks, at this stage in his career and how much he's declined. Sometimes better the devil you know, and at least we kind of know what to expect from Moicano because we've seen him recently. At least we know, he is capable of showing up and trying to win and, having success on the ground if you give him a chance to get on top of you, right? So, Moicano is a strange grappler because, at times he does lack physicality, but then does have slick back takes, does have pretty nasty ground and pound. But like I say, there's a big difference between mauling guys like Jalen Turner, and Brad Riddell, and doing that to someone that's very high level on the ground like Dariush. So it'd be interesting to see what would happen if Dariush got on top of Moicano. So it's a very interesting fight, very complex fight. My lean is definitely Dariush, but with the caveat that we haven't seen him in a long time. Now, in terms of the over-under on this one, I was quite surprised at the odds on the fight not to go to a decision. I did think that the odds would be much steeper, so I have bet on this fight not to go to a decision. My rationale being, if you look at Moicano's record, it is very unlikely or very rare that this guy goes to a decision. Like you can see in his last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. In his last 13 fights, he's only gone to a decision twice. And if you look at Dariush's record, he does go to a decision more often. But in his last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 fights, he's only been to a decision 3 times. So I'm personally quite surprised that the odds are this generous on the fight not to go to a decision. Remember again, Dariush has only been to a decision 3 times in his last 9 fights. And Moicano has only been to a decision twice in his last 13 fights. So, for me, the odds on fight doesn't go to a decision being close to even money, it's kind of absurd. Because both these guys are very aggressive in pursuing a finish. Money Moicano wants the bonus check. Dariush has always been aggressive, has always had that killer instinct, has always gone to war. And at 36 years old, neither of these guys are going to be as durable as they used to be. So we know Moicano is chinny. We know Dariush slows down as fights wear on. We know neither guy wants to take a backward step. We know even though Moicano is chinny, he's quite happy to stand and bang. We know Moicano and Dariush are both dangerous on the ground. We know Dariush has knockout power. So for me, I'm expecting a war between these two on Saturday night. And at 36 years old, I don't think both of them can survive a 15-minute war. I think one of them will end up getting finished. And that's why I think if you look at the odds on this one, the odds money line on both of them are in the even money odds range. And for slightly less worse odds, you can bet on the fight not to go to a decision. That feels like a far better bet to me than taking either of these guys to win straight. So I will be betting on fight doesn't go to a decision this weekend. And I'm pretty confident it hits. Like I say, I'll hit you with them numbers again. Only 2 of Moicano's last 13 fights have gone to a decision. And only 3 of Dariush's last 9 fights have gone to a decision. So if you're just a stats-based bettor, not a bad bet for you on this not to go to a decision. Especially with the fighting styles of the two, how aggressive they both are. So in terms of most likely outcome for the props, Dariush by knockout or TKO, I think is pretty likely. Outside of that, Moicano to win in round 3 is interesting to me because Dariush may become too tired to defend himself. So if we take a look at the odds on that, where are we? Dariush in round 3, Moicano in round 3, 11.0 plus 1,000. My logic being, if Dariush slows like he usually does, and his cardio is likely to look worse now that he's 3 years older at 36, we know Moicano wants the 50 Gs. We know he's got the killer instinct. We know he's aggressive in pursuing the finish. If he senses Dariush is starting to slow down and gas and get tired, Moicano could really start to pour it on and get aggressive for the finish. So I do quite like that prop. I know I keep saying it, but we've got another absolutely brilliant fight to dive into here. Another incredible matchup between 2 very well matched fighters, and definitely a fight that could go either way. I just get very passionate about events like this. It's very motivating because, you know, we do get a lot of fights these days which, you know, are very one-sided. They do end pretty quick. And those fights are very difficult to make money on in live betting. So when you get a card like this full of such interesting matchups, it's just super motivating for me because these are the type of events I thrive on. These are the things that get me excited. And, you know, when the chips are down, I always perform well in spots like this. So another great fight to dive into. And again, I'm looking forward to sharing my research with you. And I'm really hoping you find this useful. I'm sure you will. So we'll start off by taking a look at the odds. We can see that Lima is a reasonably big favourite at average odds of about 1.56, which is going to be minus 179 for an implied probability of 64%. If we take a look at the odds on Talbott, he's going to be around an average of 2.40, which is going to be plus 140 for an implied probability of 42%. So Talbott is 26 years old, 5'10", with a 70-inch reach, and Lima is 27 years old, 5'6", with a 68-inch reach. So you can see both guys are about the same size. You know, Talbott is longer and taller, bit of a reach, but you know, Lima is a very high-level technical striker, so I don't think the size is going to mean too much in this fight, because whilst, you know, Talbott will gain a bit of an edge from the height and reach, Lima will gain more of an edge in the grappling with that smaller, compact frame, that lower center of gravity, and they're both pretty much the same size. So, obviously both these guys are primarily strikers, and how competitive this fight turns out to be, who wins this one, is most likely going to come down to how much grappling we get from Felipe Lima, because we saw in Talbott's last fight against Ronnie Barcelos that Talbott's takedown offense and ground game needs some work, right? It's not terrible. When I went back and watched the fight again in the cold light of day, Talbott didn't look as bad as I thought he did when watching the fight live, but still definitely needs some work. Having said that, he is only 26 years old. He hasn't fought for 6 months, so I'm sure Talbott is making big improvements from fight to fight, and I'm sure Talbott is getting a lot better. We have seen a bit of improvement in Talbott as well. If you look at his Contender Series fight, there wasn't much grappling in this matchup, but there was a little. And in the fight against Reyes Cortez, Talbott did look very bad on the ground. And if you guys go back and watch my breakdown video for the Talbott versus Barcelos fight, I was saying in that breakdown video, the last time we saw Talbott on the ground, he looked very bad. And so just be careful betting Barcelos this weekend, because if you use a grappling heavy game plan, Talbott could be in a lot of trouble, and then we all saw what happened. So yeah, this fight, how competitive it turns out to be, will come down to how much grappling we get from Lima. And that's difficult to kind of gauge, because Lima is primarily a striker. He's not one of these guys that comes in using grappling heavy game plans. If you watch his past fights, he likes to stand and strike, he likes to stand and bang, and he's more of an opportunistic MMA grappler who will shoot the odd takedown here and there to steal a round or two. But, you know, you could go entire rounds without this guy trying to grapple at all. And typically when you're dealing with someone like Felipe Lima, who has striking in their DNA, it's unlikely, it's quite rare that they're going to come out and grapple relentlessly, just because it's not who they are, it's not their style. And you very rarely see a fighter like Lima, you know, switch it up and to do something totally different to what we've seen in the past. So whereas in Talbott's last fight against Barcelos, for the most part he had to deal with the constant threat of the takedown from Barcelos, I don't think it's going to be like that from Lima, and I think a good amount of this fight is going to be a stand-up fight, which is why this is such an interesting matchup. Having said that, Lima, very technical striker, very high-level striker, and that will make it more difficult for Talbott to stuff the takedowns and prevent Lima from getting this fight to the ground, just because with Lima being so technical on the feet, he's going to be able to set up his takedowns much more effectively than Ronnie Barcelos, who really couldn't set his takedowns up particularly effectively against Talbott, because he didn't have the striking to gain respect in there against Talbott, and yet he was still able to hit takedowns repeatedly over and over and over. So if Barcelos had a lot of success with Talbott, you know, getting him down, controlling him, Lima likely will as well, because Lima will have the element of surprise on his side. Not in terms of, you know, Talbott not expecting Lima to take him down, because he will be expecting that, but he won't see it coming. It'll be far harder for him to read because of how well Lima can mix it up. He's way more well-rounded at this stage in his career than Ronnie Barcelos is in his late 30s. So, you know, if Lima does grapple, when Lima does grapple, he's got good takedown entries, he's got that low center of gravity. You know, Talbott's takedown offense isn't terrible, but it's not great either. And the worst part, I think, about Talbott is if you take him down, put him on his back, he is quite weak on his back. He is quite easy to hold down and control, which I wouldn't have expected, actually, for someone as athletic, with, you know, balance as good as Talbott's, that moves around as well as Talbott does on the feet. It was a bit of a surprise for me, seeing how weak he looked in round 1 against Nick Aguirre, or on the Contender Series, or then against Barcelos in his last fight. So if Lima grapples hard, should be an easy night's work for him. Both guys have got pretty good cardio. Lima slowed a bit in the 3rd round against Miles John. Talbott slowed a bit in the 3rd round against Barcelos, but that was mainly due to output, and for the most part both these guys have got pretty good cardio. Now, in terms of how both these guys match up from a stylistic point of view, they're both very well trained, they're both very technical strikers, they both do have very different styles of striking. So Lima, you know, very light on his feet, very mobile, likes to chip away at you with volume strikes, doesn't really have too much power in his hands, but very technical, very well trained. Talbott has more of that sniper style, so doesn't throw the same volume as Lima, he's not as mobile as Lima, but because he's not as mobile, he has more knockout power. He plants his feet more, very accurate, very fast, and he can inflict a lot of damage on the feet. So for me, when it comes to striking, it's kind of the power, the athleticism, the accuracy, the damage of Talbott versus the very technical, good footwork, good movement, kind of point fighting style of Lima. So the way I see this fight going is I think it'll be razor close on the feet. I think both guys will have some success. I think Talbott will struggle to match Lima's volume, but I think Lima will struggle to match Talbott's power. So it'll be very close, very competitive. Lima will probably slightly outstrike Talbott, but Talbott will land perhaps the harder, more damaging, more impactful shots. And I think it'll be very, very close. And ultimately, I think this fight will be decided by grappling. If Lima comes in and, uses grappling to steal rounds, grapples a decent amount to tire Talbott out, that'll probably be the difference and Lima will win. But if Lima's ego gets the better of him and he chooses to stand and bang, good chance Talbott lands the harder, more damaging, more impactful shots and wins. Or, with how athletic and young Talbott is, there's a pretty good chance Talbott will have improved to the point where Lima can't get him down, and then in a stand-up fight it's absolutely razor close. So, what does all this stuff mean from a betting point of view? It's quite a tricky one, actually. It is quite a tricky one because obviously I always say let the odds do the work for you, but the odds aren't great on Talbott, right? If you look at his odds, they carry an implied probability of 42%. Ideally, you would want to be capping Talbott at like 50%. You'd want this fight to be 50-50 in order to get any value on him at all. And you can't really cap him at 50% because we've already acknowledged that they're very well matched when it comes to striking, and it's likely to be very even if it stays standing. And with Lima definitely having the advantage on the ground, like even if you thought the fight was 50-50 standing, you've got to give Lima like at least a 55-60% chance of winning, in which case, there's absolutely no value at all in betting on Payton Talbott. So this is one of those fights where I always say let the odds do the work for you, and in a lot of spots that means going dog or pass, but this is probably one of those situations where you probably go with a favourite, to be fair, because if it stays standing, it's likely to be razor close, very competitive, but Lima has that, that ace in the hole, that trick up his sleeve where he can grapple and actually win the fight dominantly with a grappling heavy game plan, which means, you've got to give him like a 60-65% chance of winning, which takes the value away from, of course, Payton Talbott. If you put his odds in, obviously that's about where his implied probability is as well, right? So it's a tricky one. I guess what I'm trying to say is the odds are probably exactly where they should be. There's probably not a strong position on either side here. The bookies have probably nailed the odds on this one. You could say that perhaps I'm not factoring in the threat of Talbott winning by knockout enough, and that could get you closer to 50%. But Lima's very well trained, very good defensively. He is a tough fucker. He's never been KO'd, albeit has not fought anyone as dangerous as Talbott. But, yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know if this is dog or pass. The implied probabilities are exactly where they should be. The odds are basically where I cap the fight, boys. So, for me, it's an easy pass. In terms of the over-under on this one, I do think it's quite likely to go deep. Do think there's a good chance this one will go to a decision. If you look at Lima, he's been to a decision in 5 of his last 7. If you look at Talbott's record, yes, he's had a lot of quick finishes against a relatively low level of opponent, but he's also gone quite deep here. Has gone to a decision in 2 of his last 3. Styles make fights. I think this one's quite likely to go deep. In terms of most likely outcomes, that would be Lima by decision, but the odds are absolutely terrible. Talbott by knockout or TKO, the odds are too steep on that for me because Lima is a tough fucker. So yeah, I hope you found that useful. If you did, please hit the like button below and subscribe if you haven't already. We'll be back next week with another breakdown for whatever cards come in next week. And yeah, if you want to make some money this weekend, strongly consider joining my live betting group. I'm not saying we will make money this weekend. I have absolutely no fucking idea. But I do know we're going to make a lot of money throughout the rest of the year. because we always have and we always will, and I'm the best in the world at live betting on this sport. So thank you very much for watching. Take care, everyone. Love you, and I'll see you all very, very soon. Nice one, guys. Bye.